Hi, I'm Susan Shaner with Community Forum, and I have the great pleasure to have with me today Jonathan Fast, MSW, PhD, author, and associate professor at Yeshiva University. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. And I want to let our audience know that author of the recent book, Beyond Bullying, Breaking the Cycle of Shame, Bullying, and Violence.
Right.
So this is just hitting the press, quite timely. As we sit here filming this, it's the 3rd anniversary of Sandy Hook, and we're filming this in the Danbury Studios, which is 15 minutes from that location.
Right. That's something that touched both of us very deeply.
Yes, yes. So can you share with us a little bit about your background and what compelled you to write this particular book?
So my background is I had a first life as a screenwriter and a novelist.
Oh.
And then I had a kind of a midlife transition where I became a social worker. And I got a PhD I continued. I got a PhD in social work, and then I got my doctorate at Yeshiva, and they sort of kept me there. And I've been teaching there for the last 20 years. While I was a social worker, before I became a professor, I worked at a school-based health center, and I got very interested in, it was in a high school, and I was working with adolescents, and there was a lot of self-destructive behavior going on. It got me really intrigued with adolescence and with violence and defining identity, which is the task of adolescence. So when I started teaching, I studied that area. And when the school shootings started, what they call the epidemic, of course it's not really an epidemic, but it seemed like large frequency was about well, the first one was in the 1970s, but really up to 1999 with Columbine. And after Columbine, I decided that I wanted to write a book about it, and my feeling was that if I looked at all the cases that had taken place in that 20-year period between 1970 and 1999, I could figure out, I'd get some insight, even if I couldn't figure it out completely, some insight into why kids were behaving like this.
So you got the idea right after Columbine?
Initially.
And then but you didn't really start the research then?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
Actually start the research then. And then in 2008, I published a book of all the case studies that I had done, the 13 case studies, called Ceremonial Violence, which is still in print. And I just looked at all the cases, and what I saw was that while they had nothing in common, which the FBI and the Secret Service also did reports, similar kinds of reports, and they found nothing in common, because the natural instinct in a situation like this is to draw up a profile.
Yes, right.
Even though the FBI doesn't profile people like on TV, they still want to just have some way of at least narrowing down the suspects.
Yeah.
But they couldn't find any commonalities to profile the school shooters because they were so diverse a group of people. But what struck me was that there was an enormous amount of shame in the lives of these kids. And then you have to say, well, there are a lot of people who have shame in their lives, but they don't go around shooting people. So what I moved to after that, and now we're looking at about 2009, 2010, was the idea of shame management, how people manage their shame. Because it can be really crippling. And again, I see that the school shooters were typically kids who didn't have any facility for managing shame. And that got me really fascinated with the subject of shame, and I discovered that there was a sort of a small group of people who had been doing research into shame as the master emotion since 1970.
So everything that's in this book, and you've really integrated a lot of different things, and I do want to drill down on this whole shame aspect and how you're defining it. But so it sounds like you really got started maybe about 20 years ago with grappling with a question, and you did a lot of research over the years, and then you kept kind of narrowing kind of what your focus is going to be, and what your perspective on bullying is, and this core component is the shaming and restorative justice, and we're going to talk about that too. And then you're saying 2010, 2012, and then of course Sandy Hook happened, and so that was just a coincidence that it was around the time that you were kind of congealing and gelling all this research. Is that?
Yeah, that was after the book was finished, I guess, in 2000, the end of 2013 or 2014, and then it takes about a year of messing around with the manuscript to get it published.
Okay.
So Sandy Hook just happened.
Right at the end of your finishing it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, even Sandy Hook is a good example of a child who doesn't have any shame management possibilities.
Yeah, because you mention it so it made the book. I mean,
in the introduction, I think I went back and put it in.
Added it in. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start. You said one of your major premises is that shame is important to all human behavior, and there's good shame and bad shame.
Right.
And it's a taboo subject.
Yes.
So
you never talk about it.
Yeah.
Someone said to me, "It's not a taboo subject."
Yeah.
And I said, "When was the last time you talked about shame?" And they looked up and they said, "Yeah, maybe it is a taboo subject."
Well, when I was reading it, I thought, good shame? Because shame always seems like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But tell the audience a little bit about why is it a good thing?
Well, also that's my idea. It's not my idea. It's actually an idea of the literature. But there's good shame is when you teach somebody something, and you basically have to go back, and I'll say every person lives in a group or a community, and every community has its own culture. And if a person wants to be part of that group, they have to adopt the culture.
Yeah.
And if they refuse to adopt the culture, they get expelled from the group, and that it usually involves shame.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to come to this church, you need to dress up nicely, right?
Yeah.
You need to behave in a certain way.
Yeah. So
and if you can't do it,
so to be socially acceptable, that's considered, positive.
That's healthy.
I mean, I know, like in sort of ancient tribes, when people did things that weren't, they would just banish them.
Right.
People would walk off and die
Right.
because there's nothing more primal than being banished from your tribe.
In China, they always did that. When you were in the royal court and you did a shameful event, you either killed yourself or you were exiled to the distant provinces where life was so barbaric, you figured you might as well kill yourself. That was in the Tang Dynasty.
Yeah.
They did a lot of that. And it's a terrible thing to be expelled from a group, even a country club, even a church.
Right, yeah.
So John Breathwaite, who is one of the people who's done really outstanding research in this area, says that he talks about reintegrative shame, which you would do, for example, with prisoners, where they've committed some terrible crime. You want to reintegrate them into society. Now, there are other people who believe that there is no positive shame, that you can't. Harriet Lerner, for example, who wrote The Dance of Anger, I got into an argument with her about this. She says, there is no good shame. Shame is always bad. So, but I think it's very instructive to consider good and bad shame.
Why do you think that it's taboo, like we don't talk about it?
Because it goes to the very basis of our culture.
Yeah.
Because it's shame and it's social status. And that's the other thing we never talk about, is social status. I don't remember ever having a conversation about that except with the people closest to me in my life. Because, I mean, what do you say? What kind of conversation? I've often thought about starting a workshop by having everyone turn to the person next to them and figure out who is of a higher social status of the two of them.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine anyone doing that. Because if the worst thing, they'd say, well, you have more money than I do. And the other person would say, yes, but you can play the piano so beautifully. And I imagine that people would sort of carve out groups in their lives where each one would excel, because the idea of saying that you're of a higher social status than someone else just seems so hostile and aggressive.
And arrogant, actually.
And
right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
unacceptable, unacceptable.
It's a funny thing.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think people do have a sense of, in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds and groupings, do people really socialize much with people that they think are not in the same socioeconomic backgrounds as them? I mean, that's an interesting question.
Apparently not.
Right?
Yeah, I don't think so. Not in my experience.
Yeah. So even though people don't talk about it, they sort of play it out anyway, in a way.
It's intuitive.
Yeah.
And we have a very aggressive competitive society that we live in. And it's become more so as the gap between the richest and the poorest has increased.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a myth that every person can be anything they want to be in America. But in fact, becoming one of these 1%ers, one of these wealthy people, at a point when the middle class is vanishing, poses enormous problems, particularly if you're not good in math or computer science, things like that. And I think that's one reason why we see the violence of teenagers increasing like this.
Yeah, so let's talk about what makes a bully.
Okay, what makes a bully is a person who is larger and stronger than other kids, and a person, I believe, who has been shamed by someone else. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a certain, passes like a virus a little bit. I think a child who has been shamed by his father or by neighborhood kids or by siblings is the most likely to become a bully.
And you also talk about trait shame and just other kind of episodes.
Trait shame and state shame.
Yeah, can you define those?
The kid who has been bullied all his life, who was bullied early on and then later on, I call the early shame distal shame, and the other shame proximal shame, but that's really not important. But the person who's been bullied all his life, shame becomes who he is, and that's state shame. That's trait shame, rather. And state shame is just when you experience like an emotion and then it goes away. So you see the same thing with anger, right? There are angry people.
Yeah.
You say he's an angry person, and the people who are angry all the time. And there are other people who get angry and then it goes away.
I mean, we've all experienced shame or feeling ashamed at some point in our lives for whatever reason. But the difference is you're saying that when somebody is in an environment, really, and particularly in the home, as an example you're giving, with a caregiver who is repeatedly bullying or verbal or physical abuse, making them to feel less than in some way, then that becomes part of their personality. Yeah, and if they're also raised in a home where you say, well, we don't complain about stuff, we just suck it up, we're tough here. So it's that's more implicit, it's not explicit. Well, yeah, it's implicit, or it may be explicit too. Maybe stop whining about, I make you do this, I make you do some terrible thing cleaning the floor with your toothbrush or something that I learned in the Marines. Don't complain about it. So it's a situation where instead of processing the shame through complaining about it, it has no place to go. And so you see frequently, you'll hear boys who are bullies, mostly boys, talking about it, and they'll say, I had been bullied, and now I was going to be the bully. Yeah. I mean, people actually say that a lot. Yeah, I was surprised by that. And the statistic you gave is that 70% of people are bullied. Yeah. And you actually give an example of where you had the experience to see how you could get so, I think you were 8 years old or something. Right. Where you were, was it on the playground or some boy that just kept bothering you? Oh, broke my arm. Oh, he broke your arm, okay. Yeah. Yeah, and where you could see, you said you got caught up and you went to try to strike. You could see how somebody could get carried away with it. Oh yeah, that's another situation. I had a couple of good situations. Yeah, there was one where you went to like strangle a kid or something, right? Yeah, yeah. I was just going to say his name, but. Yeah, we won't go there. Yeah, no. But he just kept at me for weeks and weeks. And you just couldn't take it anymore. Yeah. And we're human, right? Yeah, but that wasn't real bullying because I was kind of bigger and stronger than he was. So it was just annoying, kind of. So it's not. I don't think it doesn't. It doesn't qualify as real bullying if somebody's bigger and stronger than you and kind of beat you up. Yeah, if they are bigger, but I was kind of bigger and stronger than he was. Yeah. And he just. So there has to be, according to Dan Ulwis, who is the specialist in bullying, there has to be a power differential. Yeah. The bully has to, otherwise it's just people fighting. Right, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you got to have a big, strong guy for the bully, and then you have to have a weaker person for the victim. And why is it more boys? 'Cause we certainly hear of girl bullying, but I know you said the girls tend to maybe self-attack, be more internal.
Right, because women, you know, and now we're talking in broad cliches,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be like this in another 10 years. But women are relational. Women keep our social fabric together while men go out and earn money. And this is already starting to change a lot.
Yeah.
So
Because women are now more in the workforce and earning money. Yeah.
So women tend not to lash out. If you look at Donald Nathanson's Compass of Shame, which I have an illustration of in the book, men tend to attack others and women tend to attack self. When women bully, when girls bully, they tend to bully relationally. They spread rumors, they gossip, and men tend to demonstrate, bully directly and physically.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a lot of crossover, and then cyberbullying is all relational, because you can't punch someone over the computer, fortunately, yet.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the school shootings and some of the, and also we could talk about, you know, terrorism, but the school shootings. Like, why is that phenomena, starting with Columbine, sort of come to be, and it seems like it's commonplace now?
Yes. I think Malcolm Gladwell wrote a piece in the New Yorker where he said we no longer need to explain it as a freakish occurrence. It's just something that happens with no reason.
Well, this year alone there was like 355 shootings. That's almost one a day.
Yeah, not all in schools.
Not all in schools though, but I mean just violent.
Well, there are an enormous
violence.
number of guns, and I think that's a problem. Because I mean it's really a problem with suicides, which is a form of attack self.
Yeah.
Because when you feel, you know, when you have a passing feeling of wanting to kill yourself, and there's a gun sitting there that's loaded and ready.
Makes it easy, and usually you don't miss.
Right.
So the school shootings though, but so why is that becomes such a way of life, and what is in our, because we're different than a lot of other countries in this, so what's in our culture and DNA that is, I don't know if this is the right word, but sort of fostering or helping create this kind of dynamic?
Well, I think we're very aggressive and very competitive, and it's the bar for kids has been raised very high.
There's a lot of stress on kids today in high school.
And also there's been a lot of pathologizing of things that we used to accept as just eccentric, like Asperger's, which is now called the autism spectrum disorder. You know, when I was a kid, there were always a couple of weird kids in the class, and it was okay because they didn't have to perform quite so much. But now the bar has really risen. It's harder to get through school now. I think it's more challenging.
Yeah.
And I think there are much more opportunities for being shamed.
Because you're not keeping up, you're not.
You just can't do it. And if you have if you're diagnosed with a mental illness, that's about the most shaming thing a person can have, I think.
And if you're sensitive at all and you really internalize these messages, and like you said, where do these feelings go?
Yeah.
They get acted out if they're not processed effectively.
Yeah, and I think probably the internet, which I love, is going to make things a lot worse, because what we see with teenagers is when they start to get bullied on Facebook, they cannot tear themselves away from it. Because they have to defend themselves. You know, as adults, if someone ranks us on Facebook, we can just sort of cancel them as a friend, or
block
something,
them,
or just walk away from it.
Yeah.
But teenagers seem to be really engrossed in it. And we've had in the last 2 years, a number of teenagers who committed suicide after being bullied. Most notably, the guy on the George Washington Bridge who was a student at Rutgers.
Yeah.
So
are there warning signs that people, I mean, in some of these cases, you know, there's kids are posting stuff, there's people that are bystanding maybe kind of see some things or hear some things. I mean, what are some warning signs that you know you could determine whether or not somebody's at risk?
Well, a lot of the school shooters have been very violent, have a history of violence, but some of them don't. So it is hard to tell.
So it's like, like you said, there wasn't like a set profile.
Yeah, and you know, the best technique I think I've heard about, and there's absolutely no, and I don't even know what school system does this because I heard about it anecdotally, and there's no evidence about it, is that they take the first graders, all the students, and they put their pictures up on a wall for a teachers' conference, and then the teachers go around putting yellow stickies on each photograph about what they know about the child. And then they go and they see which kids don't have any stickies on their photographs, where none of the teachers know anything about them. And that seems like a good way of predicting alienation.
Okay. So why don't we know anything about this kid? And let's because the problem around violence, terrorism, school shootings, you know, for the average citizen, just feels so overwhelming. I mean, what can people do to gain some sense of control? Because it's terrifying. You send your kid to school and you're afraid they might get shot. Yeah,
the thing to remember is that it's very unlikely. The number of victims compared with the number of people killed in drunk driving incidents is very small.
So put it in perspective. You're saying.
But it's a terrorist attack. You know, it's something you can't control, because anybody who can get a gun, which is now anyone, and can carry it into a public place and start shooting people. It's just impossible to search everyone who goes every place in public. But on the other hand, you have to remember that although it seems like there are a lot of incidents in this, the actual fatality rate is very, very small. It's not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen.
Okay.
I used to say it's never going to happen in New England.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
And you also talk about restorative justice. Say a little bit about that.
Restorative justice, I think, is the closest. You know, I always feel like people want to say, what can we do, what can we do? And I think restorative justice is probably the best answer. And I've looked at evaluations of a lot of the bullying programs, and there are programs that are very effective in Scandinavia that are not effective, that sort of operated about 30% effectiveness in the United States. And then there are a lot of other programs that haven't really been tested.
So why aren't they effective here?
Well, I think because in Scandinavia is are very communitarian countries with a very small gap between the rich and the poor.
Okay.
So it's a different kind of atmosphere.
So just talk a little.
But restorative processes. So restorative justice is what we do when people commit crimes. What we do in schools is restorative processes. And restorative processes, first of all, you don't suspend people. You don't kick them out of school, because kicking a person out of school
for their alienation
is just the worst shame event you can do. It's you know, this is your community, is the school, and you're out of here. Right? And instead of trying to help the person. So what you do is you get them together in a circle, a restorative circle, and this can include the police. It can include the person who's been hurt by the crime, members of the community, and it's a non-hierarchical system. So there's nobody who has the final word about things. It really depends on agreement.
So it's really about
what they're going to do.
Yeah, trying to generate a dialogue, and everybody can understand the impact on each other. And
yes, and very specifically, the bully is asked, you know, who do you think got hurt here? And the victims are asked, what does he or she need to do to restore a sense of rightness to the school? And so it may include a prison sentence, not for a little kid it wouldn't, but it may include, you know, financial remuneration.
It's very powerful.
It really is.
So, gosh, the time's going by so quickly. There's so many places we could go with this. And so, what's your hope for? I mean, you've done an incredible amount of research in this book. I was like blown away by all these different examples.
You know, I wanted to take the theory. I mean, it's kind of a revolutionary way of looking at bullying, and I wanted to apply it to all these different cases and how it explains racism, it explains homophobia, and it explains domestic violence, the same construct.
Yeah, you've really given a good flavor for the complexity of it, but you've woven the thread of shame throughout it. If somebody was interested in well, first of all, if they were interested, they could read the book. But if they were
Right.
interested in talking with you more about this, how might they contact you?
They can email me at fast, F-A-S-T, like quick,
Yeah.
.yu.edu, and I will get back to them.
Okay. Just give your email one more time in case.
Okay, it's fast, F-A-S-T, at yu.edu. And I've been giving workshops in this and speaking about it.
Really important.
Because, it's really important to me, and I feel like I can change the world in a positive way.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. And I'm Susan Shaner with Community Forum. Until next time, thank you for joining us.